When a man pulls back emotionally, most women go into panic mode. They start overthinking, replaying every word, every moment, every tiny shift in his tone. They blame themselves, they chase clarity, and they try to fix something they didn't break. But a high-value woman, she doesn't do any of that. Not because she feels nothing, but because she knows her worth is not determined by a man's moment of confusion. A high-value woman understands that emotional distance from a man is not a signal to shrink, chase, or beg for reassurance. It's a moment to pause, to breathe, to reconnect with herself, because she knows something powerful. A man stepping back is not always a sign of rejection. Sometimes it's simply a reflection of his own fears, insecurities, or readiness. And she refuses to make his emotional turbulence her emotional home. This speech is about that woman. The woman who chooses self-respect over desperation. The woman who doesn't match a man's fear, but his effort. The woman who keeps living her life fully, intentionally, and beautifully, even when his energy shifts. She communicates with maturity, observes his actions, and lets them reveal the truth. And if that truth shows he can't show up for her consistently, she walks away, not to prove a point, but to protect her peace. Because at the end of the day, high-value women know that the right man won't leave them confused. The right man won't disappear to find clarity. The right man steps toward them, not away from them. This is what a high-value woman does next, when a man pulls back emotionally. And why her response changes everything. She doesn't panic, she pauses. When a man pulls back emotionally, the instant reaction for most women is panic. It's almost automatic, like a survival response triggered by fear of loss, rejection, or uncertainty. Suddenly her mind starts racing. What did I do wrong? Why is he acting different? Is he losing interest? Is he talking to someone else? This anxiety doesn't come from weakness, it comes from caring. When you care, change feels threatening. But this is exactly where the high-value woman separates herself from every other woman. She doesn't let fear lead her. She doesn't react impulsively. She doesn't rush into emotional explanations or start chasing reassurance. She does something incredibly powerful. She pauses. Pausing is not silence. Pausing is not indifference. Pausing is not pretending you don't care. Pausing is a deliberate emotional strategy. It's the ability to notice a shift without becoming consumed by it. It's giving yourself enough space to respond from clarity instead of reacting from fear. The high-value woman understands that her emotional state determines what happens next far more than his distance does. She knows she cannot control his behavior, but she can control how she meets that behavior, and the pause is where her self-control lives. Most women, the moment they feel a man retreat, try to close the gap instantly. They send the first text. They ask what's wrong. They bring up the issue before he's even processed his own feelings. They pour more energy into the connection, hoping to reignite his. But the high-value woman knows something essential. The moment you panic, you lose your power. Because panic comes from a place where you're trying to protect something you think you're about to lose. And the truth is, anything you fear losing starts losing value inside you. A woman who pauses, on the other hand, communicates strength without saying a word. By pausing, she gets to breathe, she gets to observe, she gets to reflect. She gets to ask herself questions that matter far more than why is he pulling away. She asks, how do I feel? What do I want? What standard do I have for emotional consistency? Is his behavior aligning with the kind of relationship I want? Is this a temporary shift or a pattern? This is emotional maturity. This is self-worth in action. The pause is not about analyzing him. It's about reconnecting with herself. The pause interrupts old patterns. Many women, out of fear, slip into behaviors that push a man further away. Over-texting, over-explaining, over-giving, confronting too early, or becoming reactive. These responses come from anxiety, not authenticity. But the high-value woman protects her feminine energy by not rushing into action. She doesn't try to fix what she didn't break. She doesn't make assumptions. She doesn't spiral into overthinking. She simply waits long enough to see the situation through clear eyes. And here is the psychological advantage. Men feel the difference. A woman who panics signals emotional dependency. A woman who pauses signals emotional stability. A man may not consciously analyze it, but he senses it. Her pause reminds him that she's not going anywhere, but she's not chasing either. It subtly tells him, I won't reward inconsistency with attention, and I won't lose my center because of your uncertainty. This isn't about playing games, it's about maintaining dignity. Pausing also allows her to respect his emotional process. Sometimes a man pulls away because he genuinely needs space. Space to think, to breathe, to manage stress, to evaluate his feelings. When a woman pauses, she honors his moment without pressuring him, without smothering him, without assuming it's about her. Men come back more authentically when they feel a woman isn't trying to pull them in forcefully. Ultimately, her pause is the moment where the power of the relationship resets. It is the moment where she stops reacting to his distance and starts responding from her worth. It is a mature, grounded, self-respecting act. It may look simple on the outside, but internally, it is one of the strongest, most confident things a woman can do when a man pulls back emotionally. She matches his energy, not his fears. When a man pulls back emotionally, most women instinctively rush forward. They feel the gap widening, and instead of letting the space breathe, they try to fill it with more attention, more effort, more messages, more emotional labor. They think closeness can be rebuilt by doubling their contribution, but this creates an invisible imbalance. And imbalance is where attraction fades, resentment grows, and relationships lose their natural rhythm. A high-value woman understands this deeply. She does not respond to a man's fear with overcompensation. She responds to his energy with alignment. Matching energy doesn't mean playing games or pretending not to care. It means mirroring the level of investment, communication, and consistency a man is giving. Not because she is cold, but because she is wise. She knows that if she keeps giving while he keeps withdrawing, she is no longer in a relationship. She is in a performance. Relationships thrive when two people meet each other at the same emotional altitude. When he descends, she doesn't chase him downward. She stays grounded, balanced, and emotionally centered. The biggest mistake many women make is taking a man's pullback personally. They react out of fear, fear of losing him, fear of being replaced, fear of becoming irrelevant. That fear pushes them to do more than the situation requires. They initiate every conversation. They send paragraphs, they force emotional check-ins, they put pressure where patience is needed. And ironically, the more they try to pull him closer, the more he retreats. Not because he doesn't care, but because the energy becomes suffocating. A high-value woman does the opposite. She matches the level of effort he is offering. If he texts less, she doesn't compensate by texting more. If he seems distant, she doesn't fight for closeness. If he delays his replies, she doesn't drop everything to reply instantly. She simply meets him where he stands. Why? Because matching energy maintains dignity. It keeps her from slipping into emotional overinvestment. It prevents her from placing herself in a lesser position. It sends a powerful message: I am willing to walk with you, but I will not drag you. Matching his energy also allows her to stay emotionally safe. When she mirrors effort, instead of chasing connection, she protects her self-respect and emotional health. She gives him space to figure out whatever is happening inside his mind without making him feel cornered or pressured. More importantly, she gives herself space to evaluate him. If she keeps doing all the work, she never gets to see if he's capable of showing up. But when she matches his energy, she gives him the opportunity to reveal his true intentions. This is where emotional maturity begins. A man who is genuinely interested will notice the balance and re-engage. He will step up. He will make effort. He will not allow the connection to fade. A man who is losing interest, on the other hand, will allow the distance to grow, and her matching energy simply clarifies what was already happening. In both cases, she wins, because she gets truth instead of emotional confusion. Men respect women who maintain boundaries through behavior, not through lectures. They feel naturally drawn to a woman who does not abandon her self-worth in moments of uncertainty. Matching energy is one of the most powerful non-verbal boundaries a woman can have. It communicates that she values mutual effort, not emotional inequality. It shows she is willing to invest, but not at the cost of her dignity. When a woman matches a man's energy, she avoids the emotional trap of trying to fix his fears with her effort. She lets him take responsibility for his own insecurities, confusions, or stress. She stands strong in her center. She remains warm but not desperate, open but not exposed, present but not overcommitted. It is this emotional poise, this quiet strength, that separates a high-value woman from everyone else. Matching energy isn't indifference. It is self-respect in motion. She refocuses her energy on her life, not his behavior. When a man starts to pull back emotionally, the first thing many women do is zoom in on him. They study his every move, like a puzzle they're desperate to solve. Suddenly, every text becomes a clue. Every silence becomes a threat. Every change in tone feels like a warning. They start thinking about him more than themselves. What he's feeling, what he's thinking, why he's acting this way, what he might do next. But this intense focus does something harmful. It disconnects them from their own life. Their energy, instead of being rooted internally, becomes tied to his inconsistency. And that is exactly where their power begins to fade. A high-value woman responds differently. She doesn't abandon her life because a man becomes temporarily distant. She doesn't shrink her world to fit inside his behavior. Instead, she expands her world by reconnecting with the things that make her feel full, alive, and grounded. Her identity is not built around his attention. Her self-worth is not dependent on his emotional state. The moment she senses a shift in his energy, she shifts her attention back to herself. She reclaims her center. This is not a strategy, it is a lifestyle. A high-value woman understands that her life cannot be paused every time someone else becomes unpredictable. She has dreams to pursue, goals to build, friendships to nurture, passions to develop, experiences to enjoy. She remembers that before he entered her life, she had a whole universe of responsibilities, joys, hobbies, and ambitions. And none of those stopped needing her just because he became quiet. Refocusing on herself does not mean she is cold or careless. It means she is balanced. She knows that the healthiest relationships are built between two people who both maintain separate, fulfilling lives. She refuses to pour all her emotional energy into a man who isn't meeting her halfway. Instead of wondering why he stopped calling, she invests time in people who show up consistently. Instead of replaying his behavior, she dives back into her routines. Her self-care, her gym sessions, her career moves, her creative outlets, her spirituality, her learning, her growth. She becomes the source of her own emotional nourishment again. And here's the magic. When a woman shifts the spotlight back onto herself, everything changes. Her anxiety decreases, her emotional balance returns, her energy becomes more attractive. She shows up in the world as grounded, radiant, confident, not drained, needy, or preoccupied. Men feel that shift instantly. They can sense when a woman is living her life versus waiting for reassurance. And nothing inspires a man to step up more than a woman who stays centered in her own world instead of spiraling into his. Refocusing her energy also helps her regain perspective. When she's constantly thinking about a man's behavior, she loses clarity about what she truly wants. But when she reconnects with herself, she starts to see things as they really are, not as her fears imagine them to be. She begins to ask healthier questions. Does his behavior align with my standards? Is his consistency enough for me? Is this the emotional environment I want to invest in? How do I feel when I pull the focus back to myself? These questions guide her toward emotional maturity, not emotional dependency. A high-value woman knows that misdirected energy creates emotional chaos. When she puts too much energy into him, she drains herself. But when she reinvests that same energy into her life, her health, her social circle, her passions, her goals, she elevates herself. She grows. She shines. She becomes the kind of woman who does not need to chase because she is busy becoming. Ultimately, refocusing her energy is not an act of ignoring him. It is an act of honoring herself. Instead of revolving around his behavior, she revolves around her own evolution. And that shift from obsessing over his emotional distance to nurturing her own emotional richness, is what makes her truly untouchable. It is not a reaction. It is a recalibration. It is not a tactic. It is a declaration. Her life, her purpose, her joy, her identity will always matter more than someone else's moment of uncertainty. She communicates calmly, not emotionally. When a man pulls back emotionally, the urge to confront him immediately can feel overwhelming. A woman may feel hurt, confused, or threatened by the sudden shift in energy, and those emotions can build pressure inside her like a shaken bottle ready to burst. Most women react in that moment, not because they're wrong for feeling, but because they fear the unknown. They fear losing the connection, losing their place, or losing clarity. And in that fear, they communicate emotionally through long texts, anxious questions, accusations, or attempts to force reassurance. But a high-value woman understands something essential. Emotional reactions rarely lead to emotional resolution. Calm conversations do. Communicating calmly doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending not to care. It means choosing clarity over chaos. When a high-value woman senses a shift, she gives herself time to settle her feelings before she speaks. She knows that when she communicates in a moment of emotional overwhelm, she risks saying things she doesn't mean, misreading the situation, or escalating tension unnecessarily. Instead, she grounds herself first. She pauses long enough to return to her center so that when she speaks, her words are intentional, not impulsive. A man feels the difference immediately. Emotional communication often sounds like pressure, and pressure pushes him farther away. Calm communication, on the other hand, creates space for understanding. A high-value woman approaches the moment with stability. She might say something simple and composed like, "I've noticed a shift in the energy. If something's going on, I'm open to talking about it when you're ready." No panic, no accusation, no desperation, just clarity and openness. This approach is powerful because it shows emotional maturity. She is not trying to blame him. She is not jumping to conclusions. She is not trying to force intimacy. She is simply acknowledging the reality without allowing emotions to dominate the conversation. Men respond far better to calm truth than to emotional argument. A calm tone signals safety, confidence, and self-respect. It tells him, "I value myself enough to talk about this in a grown-centered way, not in a reactive way." Communicating calmly also puts the responsibility back where it belongs. Instead of her trying to fix his distance, she simply highlights it and gives him the space to explain. She is not assuming his reasons. She is not trying to guess his thoughts. She is not interpreting silence as rejection. She is inviting clarity. If he chooses to share, she listens without judgment. If he avoids the conversation, his avoidance becomes information. Either way, she gets truth without losing her dignity. Many women fear that calm communication makes them seem detached or uncaring. In reality, it makes them strong. Emotional clarity is not coldness, it is confidence. A woman who communicates calmly sends a clear message about her standards. She expects emotional honesty, respect, and consistency. And she will not sacrifice those expectations to appease someone else's instability. Her calmness also creates emotional contrast. When she stays composed, she becomes the emotional anchor in the situation. She is the steady presence. She is the mature energy. And a man who may be confused or overwhelmed feels that steadiness. Often this encourages him to open up rather than retreat further. Men are more willing to share their thoughts, fears, and emotions when they sense they won't be met with volatility. Calm communication also protects her from giving away too much too soon. Emotional reactions can reveal vulnerability before the relationship has earned it. They can expose insecurities, trigger oversharing, or create power imbalances. A high-value woman understands that emotional intimacy requires emotional pacing. She communicates with warmth, but she keeps her center firm. She expresses her needs without pleading. She acknowledges the shift without collapsing into it. Most importantly, communicating calmly helps her maintain control over herself, not over him. She cannot control his behavior, but she can control her response. And when she chooses calmness over chaos, she becomes someone he respects. not someone he feels pressured by. She shows that she can handle discomfort without breaking, uncertainty without begging, and emotional turbulence without abandoning her standards. In calm communication, she doesn't just express herself, she expresses her value. She observes his response, then makes her decision. Once a high-value woman has paused, matched his energy, refocused on her life, and communicated calmly, she enters one of the most important phases of all, observation. This is the moment where she shifts from reacting to revealing, not by interrogating him, not by chasing clarity, but by allowing his actions to speak for him. She understands something most people overlook. A man's response to space, balance, and honest communication tells you everything you need to know about where he truly stands. Women often make the mistake of deciding too quickly. They either hold on tightly before a man shows any effort, or they walk away emotionally before giving the situation room to show its truth. But a high-value woman does not rush to conclusions or cling to hope. She watches. She observes the pattern, not the promise. She pays attention to what he actually does, not what she wishes he would do. Because she knows that in relationships, behavior is the purest form of honesty. After she has calmly acknowledged the shift in his energy, the ball moves to his court. How he plays it reveals everything. A man who values the connection will respond with effort, consistency, and clarity. He will correct his behavior. He will lean back in. He will communicate openly, even if imperfectly. His actions might sound like, "Thanks for telling me. I've been overwhelmed, but I didn't mean to pull away." Or, "You're right, I haven't been as present. Let's talk about it." These are signs of emotional responsibility, and they tell her he is capable of growth. But she is equally prepared for the other outcome, the man who continues with the same distance, the man who doesn't increase his effort, the man who replies with minimal energy, the man who avoids the conversation entirely, the man who offers excuses instead of solutions. A high-value woman does not ignore these signs. She doesn't rewrite them, she doesn't sugarcoat them. She doesn't justify his behavior or create stories that make the situation easier to tolerate. She sees what is there, not what she hopes to be there. Her power is not in changing him. It is in choosing how she responds to him. This is the moment where emotional maturity and self-worth become visible. Instead of trying to convince him to step up, she simply evaluates whether he is stepping up. Instead of trying to decode mixed signals, she acknowledges inconsistency for what it is. She understands that emotional investment must come from both sides. If he cannot match her openness, steadiness, or communication, she respects that, but she does not settle for it. Observing his response also helps her stay grounded in her standards. She knows what she wants: consistency, emotional presence, effort, and genuine interest. If he can meet those standards, she allows the connection to grow. If he cannot, she begins emotionally detaching long before she physically leaves. This inner detachment is what protects her heart. She doesn't cling, she doesn't beg, she doesn't plead for attention. She simply redirects her energy toward what meets her needs. This stage is not emotional withdrawal, it is emotional clarity. She tells herself the truth even when it is uncomfortable. She honors what she feels without dismissing it. She refuses to betray herself for temporary closeness. And because she observes before deciding, her decisions come from strength, not fear. If he steps up, she receives him. If he stays distant, she gracefully steps back. Not as a punishment, not as a tactic, but as a reflection of what she sees. Her decision is made from data, not desperation. That is what makes her powerful. That is what makes her high value. And that is what ensures she is never in a relationship where she is the only one showing up. She observes his effort, then she makes her choice. And whatever choice she makes honors her dignity, her peace, and her worth. She walks away with grace, not for power, but for peace. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she must choose between holding on to something unstable or choosing herself. For the high-value woman, this moment is not dramatic, destructive, or emotional. It is calm, grounded, and deeply self-respecting. When she realizes that a man's emotional pullback is not temporary, not circumstantial, and not followed by genuine effort. She knows what she must do. She walks away. But she doesn't walk away to make him jealous, to provoke a reaction, or to assert dominance. She walks away for one reason only: peace. Peace is her priority. Not attention, not validation, not winning, not proving her worth. When a man's inconsistency begins to disrupt her emotional balance, she recognizes that staying would cost her too much. And a high-value woman never trades her inner peace for external attachment. So she chooses herself, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She understands that love cannot be forced, respect cannot be negotiated, and effort cannot be begged for. If he cannot meet her where she stands, she simply stops standing there. Walking away with grace means she does not shout, accuse, or blame. She doesn't craft emotional speeches or dramatic exits. She doesn't engage in long arguments hoping he'll suddenly understand her value. Instead, she walks away quietly, with dignity, because she knows that silence often reveals more strength than words. Her departure isn't a performance, it's a boundary. She does not burn bridges, she just stops crossing them. Graceful walking away means she doesn't insult him, but she doesn't excuse him either. She doesn't demonize him, but she doesn't romanticize him. She accepts the truth for what it is. He didn't choose to show up, so she chooses not to stay. That acceptance frees her. It lifts the emotional weight from her shoulders. It allows her to step back into her own life, her own rhythm, her own fullness without resentment. Many women stay longer than they should because they hope the emotional distance will suddenly reverse. They hope he will snap out of it, wake up one morning, and finally see her value. But high-value women know hope is not a strategy. Reality is. And the reality is simple. A man who wants to be there will be there. A man who values her will not leave her guessing. A man who cares will not let emotional distance become a habit. Her walk away is not punishment, it is self-preservation. She is not trying to manipulate him into chasing her. She is simply removing herself from a dynamic that no longer feels emotionally safe. She is honoring the truth that her heart deserves protection, not confusion. This kind of walk away is powerful because it is pure. There is no anger behind it, no games attached to it, just clarity and self-love. And here's what makes it even more profound. When she walks away with grace, she closes the door gently, not to leave room for him, but to leave room for her healing. She doesn't look back. She doesn't stalk his social media. She doesn't break her own boundaries by checking up on him. She steps forward. She invests in herself again. She rebuilds her emotional world without him at the center of it. Sometimes a man will realize what he lost. Sometimes he will return. But even then, her decision doesn't come from loneliness or nostalgia. It comes from alignment. She doesn't return because he finally woke up. She returns only if his actions consistently match the relationship she envisions. If not, she keeps walking. A high-value woman knows that peace is the ultimate power. When she walks away gracefully, she is not losing love. She is reclaiming her life. She is choosing emotional stability over emotional guessing games. She is choosing her worth over his uncertainty. And in doing so, she becomes untouchable, unshakable, and unforgettable. She doesn't walk away to hurt him. She walks away to heal herself. When a man pulls back emotionally, a high-value woman doesn't crumble, react, or chase. She rises, and that rise isn't loud, dramatic, or done for attention. It's done for herself. Because at the end of the day, real confidence is quiet, real self-worth is steady, and real love, the kind she wants and deserves, never requires her to lose herself. A high-value woman understands something most people never learn. You cannot control someone's investment, but you can control your response. And that response becomes the blueprint for your future relationships. When she pauses instead of panicking, she becomes grounded. When she matches his energy instead of his fears, she stays in her feminine power. When she refocuses on her life, she becomes magnetic. When she communicates calmly, she holds the emotional standard. When she observes without forcing outcomes, she becomes wise. And when she walks away with grace, she becomes unforgettable. Her power doesn't come from how much she gives. It comes from what she refuses to accept. And maybe he comes back. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he realizes he pulled away from the one woman who actually brought peace to his life. Or maybe the universe removes him because it knows the weight of his inconsistency was going to dim her light. But she doesn't sit around waiting to see which it is. She lives, she grows, she chooses herself every single day. Because a high-value woman knows this truth. The right man doesn't confuse you. The right man doesn't disappear to find clarity. The right man steps forward, not backward. So if he pulls away, let him. Your job is not to chase his absence. Your job is to protect your peace. And the moment you do that, you stop losing men and start losing only the ones who were never meant for you.